Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and a very special welcome if you're new. My name is Shelly, the owner and creator of the Vintage Hen and Chick, and in today's video I have a surprise for you. Today it's all about the IOD Spring 2025 new releases. So I'm going to be showing you 5 projects using all new release products. So if you enjoy trash to treasure upcycles, thrift flips, furniture flips, or crafting in general, then you're in the right place. Make sure and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll get notified whenever I upload a new video. Now let's get started. For project 1, we have this sewing drawer, and you guys know I love to upcycle old vintage sewing drawers. And for this one, I gave it a really good wash. I used my Dixie Belle White Lightning because sewing drawers can get really dirty. And we're gonna give this 3 good coats of the Dixie Belle Buttercream chalk paint. The reason I say 3 coats is because this is a darker wood, the chalk paint is a lighter color, and I wanna make sure that I get a really good coverage for the next step in the process. So I'm gonna give this the 3 coats of paint. I'm going to let it dry thoroughly in between each coat, and then we'll move on to the next step. So I did end up giving the sewing drawer 3 coats of the buttercream, and I let it dry thoroughly in between, and we have really good coverage. And so now on the sides of the drawers, we're going to use the brand new IOD paint inlay Portofino. I love, love, love these lemons on this paint inlay. And so I'm going to take my inlay and I'm just going to measure how much I need for each side, cut my inlay to size, and then we will apply it to the sides of the drawer. Now, if you're new to paint inlays, there's nothing to be worried about. They're super easy. There's just a few simple steps. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the buttercream paint and I'm going to paint the surface with a good coat of the paint where the inlay is going to be laid down. You want a good healthy coat because you're going to be embedding paint into that buttercream paint with the inlay. So I have a healthy coat of the paint on my drawer, and now I'm going to take my mister bottle and just spritz the back side of the inlay, the paint side, just to kind of get that paint started and ready to go. Then I'm going to lay my inlay down into the wet paint, place it down, and smooth it out with my hands. Once I have it smoothed out, I'm going to take my mister bottle again and mist the top of the inlay, and then take a dry paper towel and just mop up any excess water that's on the inlay. So I'm just gonna smooth it out, make sure that there's no wrinkles, make sure that there's no excess water on the inlay, and then we're gonna set it aside to completely dry. I let my inlay completely dry, and you can tell when it's dry when it has this opaque look and it's dry to the touch. Then you're just going to take your mister bottle and mist the top of the inlay and re-wet it. And then I just take a dry paper towel and mop up any excess water that's sitting on top of the inlay. And then you simply start from one corner of the inlay and slowly start peeling back as you go. And look at that beautiful inlay transformation. Just keep peeling slowly. If you come to a spot that it's a little resistant, just spritz it again with the water and continue to peel. It looks absolutely beautiful. And then I'm just going to take my dry paper towel and mop up any excess water that's sitting on top of the inlay, and then we let this completely dry. My drawer is dry, and I'm going to take my finger sander with some 220 grit sandpaper and just do a light distress. I like to distress the sewing drawers when I upcycle them. So I'm going to take my finger sander and just go around the edges, the corners. I'm going to do the inside and the front where there's that detailed piece. Now this is not a necessary step. This is totally optional. I do like the distressed look, but you do you. If you don't like it distressed, you don't have to. So I'm going to continue to distress it, and then once it's distressed, we're going to give this a top coat. Your paint inlays and the chalk paint do need to be sealed in, and for this I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's flat clear coat, and I'm going to give the entire sewing drawer a good coat. Now with the paint inlay, you don't want your paint to smear, and so I like to give a healthy coat over the paint inlay with a light touch, just to make sure that it doesn't smear. So I'm going to continue to give this drawer a top coat, get it all sealed in, and then we'll let it set aside, and then this drawer is complete. Our next project is this cutting board. I picked this up at a thrift store, and you can see that it has a burn spot on the front. So we're going to give this a makeover. And I'm going to start with giving this 2 good coats of Dixie Belle's Hurricane Gray chalk paint. I'm going to give it 1 good coat, let it dry thoroughly, and then come back and give it a 2nd coat once it's dried thoroughly. And I'm just going to do the top of the cutting board. I'm not going to do the sides or the back. I want to keep a little bit of contrast with the wood look and the painted look. So I'm going to continue painting this cutting board. We'll let it dry, and then we'll come back to the next step. I gave the cutting board the 2 good coats of paint. I let it dry in between coats, and now I'm just going to lightly distress the edges of the cutting board. I'm taking my finger sander with some 220 grit sandpaper, going around the outside edge of the cutting board and the inside edge of the cutting board, just to kind of show that wood through the paint a little bit. I like the contrast between the wood look and the paint. So I'm just going to lightly distress around the edges, and then once that's done, we'll move on to the next step. And the next step is we're going to stamp this cutting board, and we're going to be using the brand new Shade and Song stamp by IOD. And I'm just going to take off whatever stamp pieces that I want to use. But before I stamp, because this is a brand new stamp, you do need to season it. So I'm just taking my finger sander again and going over it with some sandpaper. You want to season it so that way it gets a good grip and tooth when you're using your ink. So I'm just gonna pick out which stamps from this set on my cutting board, and I'm just gonna place them where I want them to be. Because this is a small surface, I'm not gonna use a thin mount. I'm just gonna lay the stamps down with my hands. So I'm gonna continue to place the stamps where I want them to be. Once I like the look of where the stamps are, then we're gonna apply the ink and stamp our stamps onto the cutting board. I have my stamps where I want them to be, and we're going to use the IOD mixing white ink for this cutting board. And so I'm just going to turn the stamps upside down, apply a coat of ink to the back of the stamp, and then I'm just going to gently place my stamp where I want it to be on the board. I'm going to hold it in place with one hand and then rub the rest of the stamp with the other hand to make sure that all the ink gets applied to the cutting board. Then I'm going to take a wet baby wipe and wipe off the back of the stamp to get all that ink off before it dries. So I'm going to continue to ink up my stamps with the mixing white, place them on the board where I want them to be, holding one hand in place on the stamp while I rub with the other hand to get a good stamped image on my board. I'm going to continue to do that until I have all my stamped pieces on my board. I finished stamping my board and I let my board dry. The IOD ink is permanent, but you want to let it dry and you will need to seal it. And so I'm going to seal this with Dixie Belle's flat clear coat. I'm just going to give one nice coat over the entire cutting board, the front and the sides. I'm going to leave the back alone. And so I'm going to give this one good coat of the top coat over the board and then let it dry, and then this project is done. My next project is this little stool, and it is in rough shape. And it also has these lovely 1980s heart cutouts on the side, but we're going to cover that up. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the IOD brand new trimmings for mold to cover up those cutouts. And so I'm going to take some cornstarch and I'm going to put it inside of the mold that I'm going to be using. Then the cornstarch just helps the mold release the clay once you're done. I'm going to continue to put the cornstarch in there, and then I'm going to use the IOD air dry clay for this mold, and I'm going to take out a chunk of clay. I'm going to flatten it out in my hand and place it in the mold and press it down. And I'm going to continue to do that until I have my mold filled. Now, one great thing about the IOD molds is they have this micro rim around the mold, which makes it really easy to take your finger and your hand, to run over that micro rim, and it just kind of peels off any excess clay. And once I have the mold the way I want it, I'm gonna turn the mold upside down and just kind of let that cornstarch and gravity do its job. And my mold has completely come out in beautiful condition. Now it's time to apply this mold to the stool to cover up that heart cutout. And I'm applying it while the clay is still wet. I like to apply my molds while the clay is still wet. And for that, I'm going to be using some Titebond Quick and Thick. This is my favorite glue. I'm going to put some on the back of the mold and then use my finger to rub it around the whole mold. And you want to make sure that you get it to the edges, so that way your mold gets a good adhesion to the stool. And then I'm simply going to flip the mold over, put it in place where I want it to be, and use my hands to gently go around the mold and make sure that it's pressed down and the glue is making contact with the stool below. And then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and just cut off any excess clay that's on the edge of the stool that I'm not going to need. I did the exact same process for the other side of the stool and cast another mold and covered up that heart cutout. And I did set this aside for about 20 minutes. I let my clay and the glue dry for a little while, and now it's time to paint the stool. And for that, we're going to be using Dixie Belle's Silk in the color Serenity. And the reason that I chose the silk paint for this stool is because the silk paint has a primer, the paint, and a top coat all in one. It's a 3-in-1 paint. So I'm going to give this whole stool 2 good coats of paint, making sure that everything is covered good, especially when it comes time to paint where my mold is. There's a lot of details in that mold, and so I want to make sure that I get it nice coverage on those molds. So I'm going to continue to paint this, and then once it's painted, then we'll let it dry completely and apply a second coat. I'm using my Dixie Belle French tip paintbrush for this project because, like I mentioned, this mold has a lot of detail in it, and this French tip brush has a nice pointy tip that makes it easy to get around the outside edges of this mold and to get in all that detail and to get the good coverage. So I let my paint completely dry, and now I'm going to apply a transfer. And for that, we're using the brand new IOD Lost Garden Transfer. And I just cut out some transfer pieces that I thought would look wonderful on this stool. And with the transfers, they're very easy to use. You lay them down where you want them. You use the transfer tool that comes with all the transfers, and you rub over the transfer. And then you start on one side and slowly start to peel, working from one side to the next as you rub the transfer down and peel it up. Once you get your transfer applied, you want to use your hands or the transfer sheet to rub over the transfer, and this is called burnishing. And what the burnishing is going to do is it's going to make sure your transfer is completely adhered to your project. It's going to make sure that there are no bubbles or wrinkles in your transfer. So I applied this transfer from the Lost Garden on both sides of the stool. Now the transfers do need to be sealed in, and for that I'm going to be using the Dixie Belle flat clear coat, and I'm just going to apply one coat over the area where the transfers are. I use the silk paint on the rest of the stool, and that has the top coat built in, so I just need to seal where the transfers are on the stool. Now, because the mold that I used on this stool have so much beautiful detail, I wanted to highlight that. And for that, I'm going to be using the Dixie Belle Gold Gilding Wax on the molds. And I am just taking a artist brush and I'm dipping it in the gilding wax and kind of dry brushing over the top of the mold. And it's bringing out all that beautiful detail. The gilding wax, you just need a little bit. A little goes a long way. And so I'm going to continue to use the gold gilding wax and cover the entire mold on both sides of the stool, and look at that beautiful detail. My next project is this wood box that I picked up at the thrift store, and I'm going to embellish it with the Catarina transfer from the new IOD spring release. And full transparency, I originally thought that I was going to paint this box. But once I start looking at it and looking at the transfers that I picked for the box, I thought it was already the perfect color. It is already distressed, it's painted nicely, and so I'm just going to apply the transfers. Sometimes we don't need to repaint things that we pick up at the thrift store. So I am just going to take my transfers, and as usual, I'm going to place the transfer where I want it to be, and then I'm going to use my transfer tool and start rubbing the transfer, and then I'm going to work from one side to the other and slowly start peeling back that transfer vellum while my transfer is transferring to my box. Once I get the transfer applied to the box, then I'm going to take my hand or the back of the vellum and rub it over the transfer and burnish it in. And that's just going to assure that any wrinkles or bubbles or any loose corners on the transfer are completely adhered to the project below. And so I'm going to continue to do that to the entire box. I have several transfers that I picked out from this Catarina transfer set, and I'm going to apply them all over the outside of my box. I'm going to continue to apply the rest of the transfers to my box. I will let you watch and learn as you watch. For this transfer, I am applying it starting at the top of the box and running over the side of the box. And this is not hard to do. You just want to start from the top here, as I'm doing, and not press the entire transfer down. Just press down the part you're working on the top. Once you get that part applied, you will see that I'm going to fold the other transfer down that's running down the side of the box. And doing it this way is going to ensure that you don't get any cracks or breaks in your transfer. So you just have to start from one side when you're going around an edge. Do that part first and then do the second part. Don't try and do it all at once. And that way you will have no problems. I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and run it through this crack in the box where the seam is, just to make sure that the transfer is adhered to both sides of this seam in the box. The transfers do need to be sealed in, and for that I'm going to use the Dixie Belle flat clear coat, and I'm just going to give a good coat around the entire box wherever there's a transfer to make sure that's sealed in. I found this cute little basket at a thrift store, but I thought it needed a little bit of a makeover. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna paint the top. The rest of the basket I think looks great. And so to do that, I'm gonna start by removing the top. So I'm gonna take my small Phillips screwdriver and remove the little screws that hold the hinges in place. And that's gonna make painting the top a lot easier. So I'm gonna get these screws removed. I'm gonna set them aside. So with that, when it comes time to add the lid back on, I have them handy. And I'm going to wipe off the lid with a wet baby wipe just to make sure that it's nice and clean. And then I'm going to apply 2 coats of Dixie Belle collard greens. I picked this color because I thought the green matched the green in the basket nicely. So I'm going to give it 2 good coats. I'm going to set it aside, let it dry thoroughly, and then we'll move on to the next step. I let the 2 coats of paint dry thoroughly. I'm going to be adding a transfer to this, so I do need to seal it first. And for that, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle Satin Top Coat to seal it in. So I'm going to give the lid 1 good coat on the top, the sides, and the bottom of the top coat and let it dry thoroughly, and then we'll apply our transfer. I let my top coat dry thoroughly, and now it's time to apply the transfer. And for this little basket lid, I have chosen a transfer from the brand new IOD Petites Ornaments Gilded Transfer Book. And in full transparency, this is the first time that I will be using one of IOD's gilded transfers. And so you just take your transfer like any other transfer and you place it where you want on your surface. You peel back the backing, place it down, and then you use your transfer tool to rub over the transfer. Now, with the gilded transfers, I have noticed that you do not have to rub as hard as you would on a regular transfer. And then in the same process, you work from one side to the next and peel up your transfer as you rub, moving slowly to make sure that everything is adhering properly below. Once you have your transfer applied, you want to use your hand just to kind of burnish over the gilded transfer to make sure that it's on there properly. As with all transfers, they need to be sealed in, and for that I am going to be using the Dixie Belle Flat Clear Coat, and I'm just going to give a nice coat to the entire lid of the basket on the top, the sides, and the bottom, and then we'll let that dry thoroughly, and once that's dry, then we will put our basket back together. Now it's time to put our little basket back together. So I'm just going to take the lid, attach it back to the hinges on the basket, and then this little basket is done. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I hope I've inspired you to use all of the brand new IOD products. All of the products are loaded on my website, ready to be shipped, thevintagehenandchick.com. I'll be back next week with another video, and I hope to see you then. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.